We're here today with Reverend Missionary to America, Tesfai Tesema. Tesfai, tell us a little about yourself. Where were you born? What was it like when you were growing up?
Well, I was born in Ethiopia, specifically in Eritrea, a city called Asmara. This was about many years ago, obviously, and I grew up in an Orthodox Christian home and part of that church as a child. And things were very difficult when I was growing up, especially when I was in high school and so on. This was during the time of the Cold War, and as a result, there were a lot of turmoil in the country, political and economic and so on. And some of you might have heard of famine in Ethiopia. So that was all happening when I was growing up.
So you were Christian, and your parents were Christian when you were growing up, and you went to school. And what was it like being a Christian in Ethiopia at that time?
Yes, my parents were Orthodox Christians, and we went to church when we were little with our parents, especially on holidays and stuff like that. Despite the fact that we were Christians, I would characterize my family and myself as more nominal Christians rather than active in the faith. The church teachings were not very much about conversion or salvation by grace and those kind of things. So yes, I was part of the church and part of that history, which is Ethiopia has a very long Christian history. But in terms of having a relationship with Christ, that was not my experience growing up as a child.
And as a young man?
As a young man, especially entering into the high schools, that was, as I mentioned earlier, that was the most difficult time in the country. The king was in power at that time, Haile Selassie, and there was an anti-government movements that were happening, especially in schools, high schools and universities. And I was partly sacked by that, and it has to do with more of the poor and with the famine that was happening in the country. The communists had an opportunity to use to broadcast their teachings and messages.
The communists.
The communists.
And what year was this?
I would say in the early 1970s, late 60s, early 1970. The king was deposed in 1974. So I was part of that movement as well as a student, as a high school young man growing up. Demonstrations happening in the city, in schools, in different places, until the time in 1974 when the king was deposed with the involvement of the military in taking charge. So it was a very difficult time. I would consider myself at that time not so much as a Christian, or I was more of interested in as an idealist young man, hoping that Marxism and Leninism would improve and change the lives of people. Was sucked into that kind of life experience.
So you became a communist at that point? Definitely.
My views were changed, and had openly said, I don't believe in God, or there's no God. And those were teachings that I was receiving in books that I was reading, and involved in Marxism and communism. Yes.
And what happened? You became a part of that government, as I remember. Is that?
When I finished high school, I wasn't able to go into the university because of my grades and so on, but we only had one university in the country, and only the very top few people made it there. And I did not try to be honest to get into the university. After that, after high school, I had to find a job to support myself. My family, with the change that occurred in the country, had lost some of the property and the wealth that they had. So I needed to support myself at that point. Mm-hmm. And so I looked for it. I was searching for a job, and with some help with from some people, I found a job to work in the agriculture ministry, which was a government organization. This was a time when the communists have taken over, and they have declared that the peasants can have the land that they were working on. So the land was taken from the feudals and given to the people. So some sort of education needed to happen to educate the peasants and turning them to become more of communists. So in that. When that was happening, that was the kind of job that I was able to obtain. Mm-hmm. Became an employee of the government and sent to a rural area, working with farmers and so on.
Now, there were two competing communist groups in Ethiopia at that time.
Right. Well, the government itself declared itself as a socialist government, and Marxism and communism was their political worldview as well. But between the Russians and the Chinese, there is some difference there. The students who opposed the king and were instrumental in deposing him, really, when the military took over and became a military dictatorship, despite the fact that the military dictatorship said that they are communists, the students and others who did not like that wanted a proletariat, or kind of a workers' party rather than a military party. So that group was supported by Chinese type communism, and so despite the fact that I was working for the government, I was more interested and pulled into the other underground party, another underground communist party, which was working to overthrow the military government.
That sounds dangerous.
It was very dangerous, and in fact, eventually that led to my departure from the country, as I had been working for the government, but then underground, anti-government. There was a moment when someone had said about me that I was an infiltrator or something like that, and I had to leave the country in order to save my life, and that's how I ended up becoming a refugee in Djibouti. Walked about 21 days on foot to arrive.
All alone or with others? Or?
There were a few other. There were two ladies that came with me. We had a guide who was leading us to the border, Djibouti. It's a small port country in the eastern part of around the Horn of Africa, by the Red Sea.
And the guide wasn't very honest.
Well, we had a very difficult journey, and that is, that was a time when Ethiopia and Somalia was also at war, and so in that area where we were crossing, war was happening, so there was huge military buildup on both sides. So the guide would have not only just guide us from the path, but also make sure that we're not caught by those forces. And this is the area which is a desert, which is called the East African Rift Valley. And so we would not be traveling during the day. It would be at night when it's dark. In daytime, we'll have to find some bush and hide. This man, who was supposed to be our guide, we totally entrusted ourselves in his hands. And this two ladies and myself. Whatever we had, of course we paid him for his services, but then we had some money with us because we were going into a new country, another country, and so on. He had said to us that there will be bandits on our way and that they may rob what we have, and said they would not search me or they would not attack me, but they would do that to you. So why don't I hold your whatever you have, money, watches, gold, and we trusted him. I mean, we've already entrusted our lives into his hands. I mean, what's money anyway? We gave it to him, and after traveling with he guiding us about 4 days, one morning while we were tired and resting and asleep, lo and behold, the guy had left. He's gone, and we were in the middle of the desert, nowhere. Do not know which way to go, and here we are left.
What'd you do?
Well, it was a time of panic. The girls wanted to, somehow go back. For me, that was not an option. I was a government worker. I was wanted by the government at the time. So whatever happens, I just had to move on and move forward. The girls eventually changed their mind and joined me, and but we decided to, at that point, not knowing where we're going and not having a guide, we decided to find locals in those places, and the people who lived in that area are nomads, and so they have animals, so they keep moving around.
Farmers.
Nomads.
Nomads.
Yeah,
Nomads.
and
Okay.
that's what they are. So we located after traveling half a day, we saw some little shacks of nomads from a distance. We just went to them, and they were very scared and worried themselves because they're seeing city people come to their house. They don't know what that meant. Lucky for us, one of the girls did speak their language, so she told them what had happened to us and how this man just left us in the middle of the desert. And the patriarch of the family was not there at the house at that time. There were children, there were women, there was one young man. They said, "We'll just rest here. The father will come and we'll talk to you." And in the evening, the man came. They told him, and they were very sorry for us. And this, by the way, this family and the guy who left us in the desert, they're from the same tribe, so they felt very shamed by that, that somebody could do something like that. So eventually the man said, "Well, you're heading towards Djibouti and you have a long way to go, and the only way that can happen is if we are going to help you, we'll have to inform this to the community." And the community would have to okay that. Otherwise, especially at that time, because of the war and people were also crossing borders like that, the government would give some reward to those people who would, catch these people and then give it back to the government. And even if these people did not want to send us back to the government, some of the people in the area who saw them could report them. So they had to make sure that the community agrees with that. So the next day was Friday, luckily, when these are Muslims. They had their own community ritual meetings and religious type meetings. So this man took all three of us to that place, had us sit somewhere, and the community discussed the matter, and then the religious leader came to us, and then he blessed us, and he said, "You'll be okay." And so the family was given permission to do that. The community protected.
And these were Muslims.
These were Muslims, Muslims, and good people. And so this family eventually, what they were going to do is one of the older sons is going to guide, to be our guide. They just wanted to have that permission from the community, so they do not get into trouble with the community and with the government. So with that young man guiding us, and we did not have the food or anything like that, they themselves, put together whatever they had and sent us on our journey.
And you got to Djibouti.
We got to Djibouti,
and
to the border.
How did you? What happened after Djibouti? You spent some time there.
Well, when I arrived in Djibouti, a small town called Dikil, which is the border town, we went to the authorities there and the border guards and declared that we want to be refugees here. So this kind of thing was just beginning to happen. Ethiopian refugees crossing into Djibouti. So they already had the process set up, and they had the United Nations had a little tent, village there. So they put us there, and for about a month we were in that little town. One of the things that we realized. Yeah, and from Dikil, that's the small village town where the refugees were there. We needed to get into the capital city in order to be able to go to another country in the West. We weren't planning to live in Djibouti. It's a very poor, small country, just to be, immigrants as refugees there. From there, I had the opportunity of going to Saudi Arabia. A relative of mine who lived in Saudi Arabia was contacted by my mother telling him that I'm in Djibouti, and after living there for about a year and a half, he was able to come and help me to go to Saudi Arabia.
So you were a year and a half in Djibouti.
In Djibouti,
and
yes.
then you go to Saudi Arabia.
Yes, and to Saudi Arabia. And Saudi Arabia, that was just a very different culture, different society. Now I could find a job and support myself. Little did I think of becoming a Christian or anything like that. I had no idea what was going to happen at that point.
So you got on a construction project.
Found a job at a construction company, and it was at that place a young man, a Chinese fellow from Singapore, invited me to a Bible study, and I did not know that I used to read the Bible. My understanding of the Bible is that it's a book that you revere, and on holidays, you kiss the Bible and so on. If you get sick, they put the Bible under your pillow so that you can get well. That was the kind of Christianity that I grew up with. So studying the Bible was a new thing for me, and I'm very curious. Went to that Bible study, and it was just only those two Chinese guys and myself, and they were reading a Bible. And interestingly, it was at that meeting that I realized that there was really a God. And if you were to ask me how did I realize that, I don't know, but I felt like I was a sinner, and God is for real here with a sword to kill me because I'm a sinner. And afraid, terrorized. They didn't know what was going on in my life at that point, the guys. They gave me a New Testament, and I went to my room and tried to find a place where we read. I couldn't find it. And as I started flipping through the book, starting from the very first page, I saw a page that says a sinner's prayer, and I knelt down and prayed that prayer, and that was the turning point for me as a Christian.
Oh, so then you come to the United States.
Yes, lived for about 3.5 years in Saudi Arabia, and became Christians, found underground groups there. Christianity is not allowed, but there are groups, underground groups, and many Westerners and Asians come there to work, and some come intentionally for missions. They're called tent makers. They have professions, but then the reason they're there is just to preach the gospel. So became part of an underground Christian group. With that, I began to grow as a Christian and understood my faith, and I knew that I had to witness. So and got married in Saudi Arabia to my wife, and so as we were sharing the gospel with the Muslims, it was in 1982 that one day I was at work, and the authorities came to my house and imprisoned my wife and took her to jail and left me a message to report the next day. They came in, they confiscated everything that we had. They were looking for all the Christian materials. They didn't know. They have already been, surveilling us and so on. So they had informants and so on. So they told us, well, you can be a Christian here as long as you do not tell anybody. But if you begin to tell others about Jesus, you're not welcome here. So they said you have to leave the country. My wife was in jail, and they told me to pack my things. They did understand that I don't have a country at that point. What I have is a UN passport, which is really no good. It's just a travel document, and no government honor that, unless they deem you as a refugee. So they understood that it would be a difficult thing for us to find a visa to another country. So they left me out saying, find a visa anywhere you can go, just go. But we'll keep her here in jail. They wouldn't return us back to Ethiopia. They could do that, and that would have been very bad. So she was there for about a month, and as we prayed with other brothers and sisters, we were led to go to Sudan was the place to go for us, because that was where the U.S. Government had the embassy in the U.S. government in Sudan was given the authority to give immigrant visas to Ethiopians and Eritreans at that point. So the embassy in Jeddah, American embassy in Jeddah, said we can't give you a visa to go, even though we understand that this is a religious persecution issue with you. We want to give you a visa, but we're not authorized. But if you go to Sudan, then we'll send a telex. That was a time when there was no email. So, so God somehow orchestrated that, and then we went to the Sudan, lived there for about 2 years, planted an Ethiopian church there, the first Amharic-speaking Ethiopian church in the Sudan. And the process went on, and in 1984 we came to the U.S. As immigrants.
And where did you come? Where did you settle?
Well, the first place we came was Washington, D.C. A Methodist church sponsored us as a host, and they're very nice people. Took care of us for about 5 months, and we realized, well, we're here in the U.S. now, what next? Well, life is good. In the Sudan, it was hard. Poverty, hunger. Our first son was born. And this church and these people, good Christian people, were very, very nice. They wanted to find me a nice job with benefits and so on, because I have a family. But as we continued to, the second, third months, we said, but I'm here. What do we do next? I'm a Christian, and the whole time when we were doing church planting or anything of that sort, I never had any training. It was just reading the Bible, applying what I understand. So this was an opportunity, we said, to go to a Bible college. So the Bible college that we knew of, all the schools in this country, was one in Tulsa, Oklahoma. So we applied there, and we moved to Tulsa to the 2-year Bible training college.
You got a degree there?
Yes, and so my wife as well. We did
got
that.
Degrees, and then what happened?
Then there was a church that was being started in San Jose, California, and the pastor who was just starting it had to move away. So in 1989, moved to San Jose, California, and took that church, which was about 20-something people at that time, just Bible study, you might say, large Bible study group. Started pastoring that congregation, and pastored it for about 15 years. The biggest challenge that I beginning to face at that time, especially in the year 2000, was the future of the second generation. What's going to happen with our kids? They're culturally more American than they are Ethiopian. Linguistically, they're more American, and they're not becoming part of the church. They're just a different culture, and we didn't know what to do with that. And then I decided at that point in 2003 to resign from that church and move to Fort
Fort
Wayne,
Wayne.
to
And you
mission
did the
degree.
PhD at Fort Wayne, and then what happened?
And came back to California. But by then, Bob Newton was the president of the district, so he welcomed me. He wanted me to come, so went back and began to work on ministry there, developing a multi-ethnic type ministry.
Tell us what happened. What's the ministry like now?
Our ministry right now is we planted an Ethiopian congregation in San Francisco. It's called Addis Kidan Lutheran Church.
What does that mean?
It means New Covenant. Addis Kidan. It's New Covenant, and it's been 5 years ago since it's planted, and it's growing. It's reaching out to Ethiopians in the Bay Area.
Just Ethiopians?
It's just Ethiopians at the beginning, but recently, in the last 10 months, we started an English ministry. So we have a Bible study on Thursday evenings. About 20-something Caucasians from the neighborhood come to it. We're currently working on a strategic plan to get that group to and grow it a little bit, and then start a Sunday morning English service to reach out to the larger society.
To the other ethnic groups,
which are Americans.
Yeah. Okay.
And so our church is planning to have, in this year 2017, sometime after Easter, hopefully, we're hoping tentatively, of course, that's the dates we're working on, to have both an English and an Amharic service. We have the Amharic service going on, but we'll have a first service will be English, reaching out not just only to the second generation, but to the community, and so on. So that's where we're at now.
What's your biggest challenge in ministry now?
The biggest challenge, I think, that we face is really crossing cultures and bringing the second generation population, Ethiopian population, and discipling them and encouraging them to engage in missions and in ministry.
Your doctoral dissertation was on generational missions. What are the 2 or 3 biggest suggestions you have for a ministry that wants to reach a second and third generation?
Many of those people who, like me, who have come to the Protestant faith, do not have a Sunday school background. So teaching children is one issue, which the first generation is not well equipped of. They have not gone through that experience. So an Anglo congregation with a Sunday school experience can partner here and educate and support in developing a Sunday school for children.
Give them a model for training their children by developing a Sunday school. Okay.
Yes.
What else can be done to reach that next generation?
Eventually, it's about really empowering them and encouraging them to, once you've led them to faith in Christ.
What do you mean empowering them?
Well, what I mean by that is one of the challenges that we're facing now in the first generation, the second generation, in our context is the parents are very worried to let the children go.
To let them lead.
To let them leave. So they would, even though they are in the young adult age, 20s and even 30, they will have a separate English program for them on the side within the same complex, and control that process, not allow them to be independent and so on.
Yeah,
that's
their own decision.
Exactly. And that has to do with fear of the culture, and fear of losing identity. That kind of stuff is where we're at this point.
Do you have any other suggestions for those who want to reach the next generation, the next generations?
There would be, young teenagers who are in the in that group. Encouraging them towards seminary or training and that kind of stuff, so that they can come back and serve that community.
So you talked about learning to do Sunday school, helping the first generation learn to do Sunday school. You talked about empowering them, getting the existing group, the first generation
Right.
group, to open up and allow leadership to happen. And then the third piece that you're talking about is providing leadership training for this next generation, so that they're able to fulfill those leader roles in the church and other places. And recruiting people from among that generation to go to seminary or Christian schools and to seminary.
Exactly. And I think those are very important points.
What's your dream for what this looks like 50 years from now?
A multi-ethnic, I predict in the next 5 years, in the next 5 years, there will be multi-ethnic churches being planted by Ethiopians. And those churches will be planted by second-generation Ethiopians. And that's what I want to be a part of.